You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is Chris Burres. He's the founder and chief scientist at MyVitalC. He's a manufacturer of Nobel Prize-winning molecule that's responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result in history. It was a 90% extension of life. So very, very interesting. He's a published author, host of Uncovering the Secrets to Longevity Health Summits. He's a podcast host himself, patent holder, and a master of comedy improv. So we'll see how that fits in. But welcome, Chris. Thank you for coming.
Richard, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to kind of jump in with your genius audience. This is very cool.
Tell me a bit about your background and how you and this molecule first met, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so all of what I'll share today is in my book, Live Longer and Better. I was very lucky to have a co-author who is a 2-time New York Times #1 bestseller. My journey really started kind of, it's not a lot of people in the health space I describe ended up in the health space typically for one of two reasons. One is they have their own challenge or they have the challenge of a loved one. They get out there, they do this research, they solve the problem, and then they decide that they want to save the world. And, I have no problem with people saving the world. That's just not how I ended up here. Another way is somebody wakes up and they decide they want to make a lot of money, and they decide they're going to do that with supplements. And I have no problem with people making a lot of money. This is just not how I ended up here. I ended up manufacturing a molecule, and we started manufacturing it in 1991. And that molecule, as you kind of mentioned in the introduction, ended up, they thought the molecule would be toxic, and they put it in a toxicity study. Instead of being toxic, the test subjects lived 90% longer than the control group. So the single longest longevity experimental result in history, peer-reviewed published research, is because of a molecule that we now sell dissolved in olive oil. And let me kind of to take a step back, like, what is this molecule? The molecule was discovered in 1985. The 3 scientists who discovered it won the Nobel Prize in 1996. The best way to describe it, it was the first closed cage molecule. And so it's 60 carbon atoms in the shape of a soccer ball. If you imagine the soccer ball and imagine the lines on the soccer ball represent the bonds between the carbon atoms, you have a spherical molecule of 60 carbon atoms. It's kind of colloquially known as the buckyball. It was a whole gamut of molecules called fullerenes were named after Buckminster Fuller. Since this one is the most ball-shaped one, it's the most abundant and ball-shaped one. They call it a buckyball. We call it ESS60 now that it's kind of moved into the health space. And the molecule's amazing. Your audience will appreciate. We've been selling it to research institutions around the world since 1991. And if you remember, the Nobel Prize was granted in 1996. So we were manufacturing it 5 years before they were awarded the Nobel Prize for that discovery. The way I describe it is the molecule performs as well or better than the current best material in almost every application. So it makes better inks, better batteries, better tires, better photocells, all these things that we might not associate with the kind of the health realm of things. And then, as we mentioned, it ended up in the study, single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history. And that really changed my business partner and I, our trajectory from being happy-go-lucky carbon nanomaterial scientists. Yes, there is such a thing. Getting into the health space, writing a book. I have a podcast, Live Beyond the Norms. All of this is a very kind of dramatic change, and it's been very exciting, and I couldn't be happier. Like, I get to have amazing conversations with people like you, Richard.
Tell me, what were scientists looking for when they first looked for this? Did they stumble upon the molecule? Was it an accidental synthesis, reactant, or byproduct? Like, how was it discovered and why? What was the intent?
Yeah. It's a little bit of both. And again, I do cover this in Live Longer and Better book. The podcast is Live Beyond the Norms. So there's a professor, Professor Harold Kroto. He's actually Sir Harold. He's since passed, but he got knighted because he won a Nobel Prize. He's an astrophysicist over in the UK and had noticed a spectrum in space that he couldn't identify. Like, what was it? And he thought it might be carbon related. And at the time here at Rice University in Houston, that's where we're based, Dr. Richard Smalley was working with a piece of equipment, kind of fancy scientific piece of equipment. You could take a sample and you would shine a laser at the sample, right, and ablate that material. You get this puff of gas. It's all in an inert chamber. And then a puff of inert gas would take it into a mass spectrometer, and they could see what molecules were made. So Sir Harold Kroto came over to visit Richard Smalley's lab on 3 separate occasions. The first time he's like, hey, I would like to put carbon in your machine. Dr. Smalley was like, I'm working on very sexy materials like titanium and, elegant steels and different alloys. I don't want to put boring carbon in my machine. Harold Kroto came back again, same response. Actually came back a third time and yet again got the same response. But one of Richard Smalley's grad students, his name's Heath, who incidentally didn't get the Nobel Prize. I would argue that he probably should have, but that's kind of how research works sometimes. He pulls Harold Kroto aside and says, listen, I'm going to come in over the weekend. I'll put your boring carbon inside of our machine and see what happens. And Heath was able to tweak the settings so that you would have a peak at this 60 carbon atoms and a peak at 70. And they thought they were just making really graphene sheets, right? Flat sheets of carbon. And the question is like, why would you have a sheet be creating more sheets of carbon with 60 atoms versus 61 or 59? Like if they're just flat sheets, it's one extra carbon. It really shouldn't change the dynamics. Also at 70, because that was the other peak. And so he brought those results on Monday. They started figuring out like, what is this thing going to look like? It ends up looking like the geodesic dome that Buckminster Fuller made famous. And that's how it was discovered.
How did they know that they had discovered a useful compound? Like once they discovered it, I guess they did mass spectroscopy to look at it and maybe figure out the structure, but did they start combining it with other reactants to produce things? Or is this something that's made naturally by living things? Or is it, an exogenous adjuvant, I guess you can call it, something that's not made that helps the body?
Well, initially there were some thoughts that this would be good in the health space, and I'll talk about those in a second. Remember, the molecules discovered in 85, and that's when the article in Nature came out, and we didn't start manufacturing until 91, right? So we have about 6 years where the existence of the molecule, we're aware of it, right? Or at least theorized, because now you got to try and make macroscopic quantities. And then they're able to do a lot of, numerical modeling, in silica, like in the computer calculations to figure out what this thing might be able to do. How strong is it going to be? What is its resilience, same strength. The fact that the cage is big enough, right? So the interior of the soccer ball shaped molecule is big enough for any atom on the periodic chart. They theorize because they can understand how strong and or weak those bonds are throughout that spherical molecule. What is it going to likely bond to? So they had a lot of theories, and then a group, Huffman-Kratchmeier, created a way to make macroscopic quantities of it, and now they could start doing legit, experimentation. When we started our company in 1991, people would sometimes ask us, hey, well, what is this molecule good for? And our kind of joke, and actually a fact, was it's really good for funding. If you're doing research on this molecule, you are highly likely to get funded. In fact, this is an interesting note, kind of scientifically. There is an organization that tracks all of the papers that are referenced, right? So you write a paper, you got a bunch of references at the bottom of it. If you track that, in 1991, all 10 of the 10 most referenced papers were regarding fullerenes. They were regarding this molecule. So it was an absolute viral explosion in terms of, interest in the molecule back in 1991.
You said that it was tested on a cohort. Well, you didn't say the word cohort, but it was tested on some living creature. Was it people, mice? What was it tested on? What were the longevity effects?
Yeah. So again, they thought it would be toxic, right? So some of the shapes on the exterior of the soccer ball are reminiscent of benzene. Benzene is ubiquitous in our society, right? We don't have plastics without benzene. We don't have a lot of medicines. We don't have a lot of detergents. It really is a necessary component of modern society. But benzene on its own is known to be toxic and known to be carcinogenic. That same benzene ring shape is on the exterior of this ESS60 molecule. And so they thought it would be toxic. So they did the study. The study was a group of Wistar rats were given water one group was given olive oil and the other was given olive oil with as much of the ESS60 molecule as could be dissolved in it. And like I said, it turned out not to be toxic. It actually turned out that the test subjects lived 90% longer than the control group. And I'll add to that because at one point my director of research said this paper could have been 5 separate papers. They just covered, it's such a meaty paper. One aspect of the paper is that a typical Wistar rat will live 32 months and will have a known amount of tumor mass in its body. The longer it lives, the more tumor mass it has in its body. Even though the MyVitalC rats lived out to 62 months, none of them had any tumors. And I know I tell this to some people and they're like, oh, cure for cancer. And the answer to that is no. Like, no, it's very different to deal with a cancer that has metastasized versus being potentially, in this case, a cancer preventative. And we know things as simple as, good exercise, good nutrition, good sleep are cancer preventatives. We certainly fall into, we need to do more research, and that looks promising.
Well, when it was given to the rats, they lived longer, but what was noticed about their biomarkers or the way in which they lived? Were they, they have longer health span, or did they kind of live in a, not too good of a state? Like, what was observed?
Yeah, I guess the question is, if a typical Wistar rat lives out to 32 months, was the additional 30 months just the misery that they were living in at 30 months? And the answer is no. I kind of joke that there was no notation in the study that the rats were walking around with little rat walkers and little rat oxygen tanks, right? They lived healthy rat lives until 62 months. In fact, kind of interesting point, they were down to 2 of these Wistar rats. Think about it. I love to give kudos to these guys, right? Because if anything has ever been true kind of scientifically, when your so-called toxic substance, all of the group in the toxic substance group are alive, and all of them in your control group, the group that was given water, are dead, you can say that study confirms that the molecule is not toxic, even though that study was done technically, right? Because the toxicity piece is over. It's not toxic. They continued to do the animal husbandry for another 30 months. And so kudos to them. But yeah, the understanding is that they lived healthy rat lives all the way to this 62 months. Now, your next question, well, go ahead. I think I might know what your question might be.
They were living their best lives.
Yes.
Funny. What kind of testing was done on them? With it, I know that sometimes rats will be euthanized. Sometimes they'll let them go, and live as long as they can. But, did you do any histology on tissue? Like, how did you know what the effect the molecule had? What was the hypothesis and what actually happened?
Yeah. So one, they got down to the last 2 rats, and then one of them passed, and then they euthanized the last one. There was another piece, not the cohort that we're just talking about, right? So the water, the olive oil, and the olive oil with ESS60 cohorts. There was another group where they were injecting the rats with carbon tetrachloride, which is a highly oxidative agent, really targets the liver. And it was only the olive oil with ESS60 rats that were able to recover from that. And that's normal. They typically don't recover from that. Their ability to handle that oxidative stress load is extremely damaging. And the presence of the ESS60 molecule is what kind of enabled that smaller cohort to actually survive. So when you think about longevity, the medical community lumps longevity into 2 pieces typically, right? It is an oxidative process and it's an inflammation process. From an oxidative perspective, we can speak kind of confidently on that, which is there's an ad hoc study out on the web that shows our product to be 172 times more powerful than vitamin C, right? Like that's certainly a go-to antioxidant. And then there's a peer-reviewed published research that shows it to be 125 times more powerful than vitamin C. So certainly working as an antioxidant, and I'll come back to antioxidant because we think we're doing something pretty special there. The next is the inflammation. The FDA equates chronic inflammation with chronic disease, so we can't really speak about chronic inflammation. What we can say is that we address inflammation, acute inflammation. So that's, associated with, exercise. So we've all had a tough workout and felt that inflammation, maybe just a longer walk and felt that inflammation in our body. We can absolutely say that we manage that inflammation, that acute inflammation. And I'll kind of wrap up inflammation to say we fit perfectly in the anti-inflammatory diet. That's a diet associated with the blue zone people. Those are people who have a reduced incidence of stroke, reduced incidence of heart attack, and then also tend to live longer. So we fit perfectly there. So we really feel like we check those two boxes. Now, I want to come back because we've got this is our latest theory. We call it the BOSS theory, buffering oxidative stress system. So that's the BOSS. And we know from peer-reviewed published research that this ESS60 molecule gets into the mitochondria. We know from way back in the 90s when it was discovered that it can hold up to 6 negatively charged particles. So what we believe is happening is that it's acting as a buffering oxidative stress system. Now, here's what that looks like. Mitochondria, right? The powerhouse of every cell. Every cell in your body has between 50 and 5,000 mitochondria, except for your blood cells that have none, and your brain and nerve cells, which have 2 million. That's how much energy those use relative to every other aspect of your body. When those mitochondria get stressed, overwhelmed, and the stress can be physical stress from working out. It can be a toxic stress from smog. It can be emotional stress from a bad phone call, a bad email. When those mitochondria get stressed out, they're producing reactive oxygen species. And let me take a step back. Every power source that we know of produces a negative byproduct, right? You've got your car going down the road with exhaust. You've got a power plant with a smokestack, that smoke coming out of it. In the case of mitochondria, their negative byproduct is reactive oxygen species. These are the things that if they're left to their own devices, they're like little bumper cars running around causing oxidative stress and damage to everything they bump into. So internal to a mitochondria, you've got 2 antioxidants, glutathione and melatonin. Those are the internal antioxidants that manage the negative byproduct, these reactive oxygen species. When that mitochondria gets overwhelmed, there are more reactive oxygen species than there are glutathione and melatonin to manage those. And now you're left with reactive oxygen species running around doing damage. We know from peer-reviewed published research that the ESS60 molecule is in that mitochondria, and we believe it holds on to those reactive oxygen species so that they don't do any damage until that mitochondria can replenish the glutathione and replenish the melatonin and actually manage them appropriately, right? Like get them out of the system. I have a fun analogy for this. It's Mardi Gras. It's the end of Mardi Gras. You're on Bourbon Street. You've got these drunk reactive oxygen species running around smashing cars and windows and all sorts of bad stuff. And you've got the police, the New Orleans police, the glutathione and the melatonin coming in, handcuffing themselves to these reactive oxygen species and getting them off of Bourbon Street. But what does the New Orleans Police Department do once they're overwhelmed? Well, they stick them in a paddy wagon, and we believe that's where this ESS60 molecule comes into play. The paddy wagon is the ESS60 molecule, so those drunk reactive oxygen species are attached to this ESS60 molecule, so they can't do any damage. And then when the New Orleans police is able to replenish the glutathione and the melatonin, it can then handcuff them and get them off of Bourbon Street. And that's why we say that this ESS60 molecule is the boss.
Well, so it's an adjuvant. I guess it should be taken with melatonin and glutathione. Is that right?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, glutathione is an amazing antioxidant. Interestingly, I'll just throw this in. Our most consistent testimonial is that people take the product in the morning, they report mental focus and energy during the day, and then better sleep that night. Melatonin, this antioxidant responsible for reactive oxygen species in the mitochondria, is known as the sleep hormone. But you're exactly right. This just buffers that stress. It doesn't ultimately take care of it. It's still dependent on the mitochondria to replenish that glutathione and replenish that melatonin so that it can then manage those reactive oxygen species.
So, all right, you've done the toxicity studies, you've done the efficacy studies, at least part of them. Where is this at? Is it through clinical trials? Is it in use? Can it be gotten through a doctor? Like, what stage is it at?
So I think you asked this earlier, and I thought I didn't answer it. So one important piece is this is a naturally occurring molecule, right? So we have all been exposed to this. If you collect the soot from a candle flame, and usually you do that by putting a cold steel plate on top of that candle flame, that black soot that accumulates on that cold steel plate has parts per million or parts per billion of the ESS60 molecule in it. So you've absolutely been exposed to it. So this is This is something where it's interesting. One of my jobs has been to like, how do we navigate the FDA and the FTC, right? These are very important. I think they do a good job. I know there's a lot of people in the supplement space who are like, oh, we don't like the restrictions. I think they have the appropriate restrictions in place, and I'm very happy that they have them. One of the things, since this is a naturally occurring molecule, is you don't have to prove that it's safe before you go to market. Now, let me describe that, because actually when I read that on their website, I was like, let me copy this because they're going to pull it down tomorrow because there's no way this can be true. The reality is Richard, you could make a supplement that's like 10% vitamin C and 90% vitamin D. I could make the reverse, and now we have two supplements. There's no way that the FDA has the budget to review these things before they go to market. It is our responsibility to report any serious adverse side effects to the product. We have tens of thousands of customers at this point. So we have to report any adverse side effects. To date, we have not had to report anything to the FDA because we haven't had any serious side effects. The human trials, as you probably are aware, are extremely expensive. The thing that we've done right now is we did a sleep study, and we did this with 15 participants. We actually collected survey data about sleep, so we weren't doing this in a sleep clinic, but we collected survey data. How hard was it to fall asleep? How well did you sleep? How did you feel in the morning? And we collected that data 10 days before they took the product, 10 days on the product, 10 days off the product, and then 10 days back on the product. 100% of the participants reported improvements of sleep while they were on the product. And so we are continuing to push. We actually published about 4 months ago, I think I guess what I'd like to share is a lot of supplement companies don't continue to do research. A lot of supplement companies certainly don't publish that research. We're not only continuing to do research, we're also publishing that research, and very proud of that.
Okay, so this is available through MyVitalC. Is it coming in as a standalone compound? Is it a powder you mix in their drink? Is it a pill? What comes with it?
Yeah. So what it is it's a high quality extra virgin olive oil with as much of the ESS60 molecule as we can get to dissolve in it. So a typical serving is 1 teaspoon or 5 mils. We sell it in a bottle. The bottle comes in, it comes with a measuring cup, a medicine cup, right? And so you just pour out 5 mils and you drink it. Some people don't really enjoy the taste of olive oil. We do have a gel cap if you're interested. I actually like the taste of olive oil. It is a high quality extra virgin olive oil that will leave a peppery flavor at the back of your throat. I don't know if you've been to an Italian restaurant. Some restaurants will pour the olive for you to dip your bread in, and then they'll crack pepper onto the olive oil. What they're actually trying to do is make that olive oil taste more expensive. They're trying to mimic that peppery flavor that you get from a high quality extra virgin olive oil. So yeah, it's an olive oil product with as much of the ESS60 molecule as we can dissolve in it.
Okay. What other feedback have you gotten? So you did the sleep study. Was it extremely positive or mildly positive? What was some of the commentary?
Yeah, I can share. I'll share a couple of things. I'll share my own embarrassing kind of sleep testimonial, and then share a couple others. So I have to embarrassingly admit that I used to take 2 naps before noon on Saturdays and Sundays. And what that would look like, my kids are 14 now, but long ago when they were little, I would wake up with them. I would lay on the couch. They would physically sit on top of me to watch cartoons, which somebody pointed out later was like a really good parenting technique, because if they got up, they would wake me up so they couldn't just be running around the house. But that was my first nap. And then I'd go downstairs, have breakfast, and come back and resume that same position and have 2 naps. When I started taking this on a regular basis, at that time they were still young. We would get in that same kind of, they're sitting on top of me watching cartoons, and I just didn't need to fall asleep. I wasn't tired, and so I would just get up and do stuff. And you couple that with, I've got 2 more. My business coach describes it as, for 50 years I needed an alarm clock to wake up. Since I've been taking MyVitalC, I wake up before the alarm clock. And if he goes off of the product for about 10 days, then he starts to need the alarm clock again. And then this is, I'll share, arguably the worst testimonial about a supplement ever. So we've got a big distributor here in Houston. Her name is Gwen. And she initially ordered the product for a dog. She had no intention of taking it. She noticed such a profound difference in her dog that she decided to start taking it, right? by the way, that's a pretty amazing testimonial in and of itself because there is no placebo effect with pets, right? Ironically, they're not smart enough to go, oh, I got my dropper of the ESS60 in olive oil today, so I'm going to have more energy. But she noticed this profound difference in her dog. She started taking the product. I interviewed her, and she shared with me that if you had asked her at the 3-month mark, did she notice anything? She would have initially said no. But as she stopped and started thinking about, what was going on in her life, she's like, I'm working later. I'm waking up earlier. I was never a morning person. And then arguably the worst testimonial about a supplement ever, I cleaned my garage, right? Like we don't use that in marketing material, but that means something, right? The garage is a big work. Maybe it's the, emotional baggage that's in the garage, but we get this energy. Remember, most consistent testimonial, people take it in the morning. They report mental focus and energy during the day and then better sleep that night. And I want to go back to the boss theory, because we literally have head-to-toe testimonials, and this is probably a good time to kind of interject the FDA disclaimer. The FDA has not evaluated our product. It is not intended to treat, diagnose, cure, or prevent any disease. This is a cutting-edge molecule. It's better to assume that any testimonial that I'm sharing with you just won't happen for you. Dig into the research and understand if this is something that you're interested in trying. So we have head-to-toe testimonials. Like even before we had any marketing material, even before I was going on podcasts talking about it, we had people calling us saying, hey, my hair is growing back. It's growing back in the original color, right? Again, don't expect that to happen to you. And then the other one is toe. We have this influencer we're working with who, when he was 5 years old, a crab bit his big toe and split his big toenail. And for his entire life, he had a split big toenail until he was 65 after he started taking our product. And so when you start thinking about head-to-toe testimonials, what could possibly be driving improvements at such a broad range of systems biologically, and you go back to that boss theory. And if you're reducing the negative impact of overwhelmed mitochondria, which every cell in your body has between 50 and 5,000, then that's the explanation.
Have you tried taking it at different times, right after a workout, or if you have a meal when you're like, oh God, I shouldn't have eaten that?
Yeah, so our recommendation is that you take it in the morning. We have a small percentage, maybe 2 to 3%, who say if they take it later in the day, it'll keep them up at night. That's definitely not true for me, but I'm also the guy who could have a cup of coffee and then go right to sleep. Now, I know my sleep numbers. I have an Oura ring to track my sleep, and I know my sleep is not as good, but it just doesn't keep me up. So we do recommend it in the morning. The things that I'll play around with, so we actually have a 2-time U.S. ultra running champion. His name is Anthony Kunkel. He loves our product. My first conversation with him was fascinating. He said, Chris, I was taking your formula. I was taking one single serving and I didn't really notice anything. And then I tripled it and I was like, wow. And what he shared with me is, I believe this product could be the difference between somebody having a running hobby and a running career. And so subsequently, he's super analytical. He's what an amazingly analytical person this is. And by the way, he won a U.S. championship at 50 miles and at 100K, so 62 miles. He is pushing his human body to the limits. What he tends to do is he'll take our MCT. So we have 3 different oils. We've got olive oil, avocado oil, and MCT oil. He tends to take the MCT oil at the beginning of his training blocks. MCT is actually good for hunger suppression. He's trying to stay super lean. And then he ramps up to the olive oil. The reason he ramps up to the olive oil is the olive oil has the highest concentration of the ESS60 molecule. We get about 0.8 milligrams per milliliter in the olive oil, about 0.6 in the avocado oil, and then about 0.3 in the MCT oil. And just to share my kind of daily routine, and it's interesting because we're bringing the product to market. This is kind of 2018. We never really wanted to get in the market, but our customers were like, hey, we want this product. We want to be consuming it. And we kind of finally acquiesced to them and started, moving it into a larger scale production. Around that time, I could get to the middle of the day and be yawning, be thinking maybe I need a nap or another cup of coffee. And I could always look back and I hadn't taken my MyVitalC that morning. So I was very diligent about getting it into my morning routine. So now I don't know if you've heard of bulletproof coffee. It's a coffee recipe.
Yeah, I haven't.
Yeah, it's a coffee recipe by Dave Asprey. It includes some MCT oil and some ghee, purified butter. So I do kind of that. We have our own MCT, of course, with the ESS60 molecule in it. While that's blending, I don't do the ghee because I really don't want all those calories. Not concerned about the fat. I just don't want all those calories first thing in the morning. I'm doing intermittent fasting. So I have MCT. While that's blending, I take a teaspoon and a half of our olive oil product. And so now I've had about a teaspoon and a half of our MCT in my coffee, a teaspoon and a half just straight out of the spoon, which I really enjoy. I do like the peppery flavor. And then for lunch, I'm usually having some sort of salad, and I'll put our avocado product on our salad.
Any unexpected effects you've heard? I know it's anecdotal, but from customers or friends, just you're like, wow, I don't know why that happened, but okay.
Yeah. So, I'll talk. This is really exciting. I was just at an event called A4M, which stands for American Association of Anti-Aging Medicine. It was in Las Vegas, and we had a guy who we met at a previous conference. He came up and he shared this. I actually have a video with him. So it's just amazing. He says, Chris, I started giving your product to all of my patients, and they're looking at a thing called C-reactive protein. This is an indicator of inflammation, right? So I can't make any claims here. I got to collect the data. I'm just going to share the story that he shared. He says, what I can tell you, Chris, is that it doesn't matter if you're a man, a woman. It doesn't matter if you're pre-surgery, post-surgery, if you're, diabetic, if you're, have a heart condition, cardiovascular disorder. It just doesn't matter what you have. Your product is reducing the C-reactive protein. And again, that's an indication of inflammation. So we got to be very careful about talking about that. He said, and it's dramatic. Like he gave me one example, and I don't want to get into too much of the details. It was a dramatic reduction in C-reactive protein in one of his patients that he wasn't able to bring it down. I would say that's pretty surprising. Some of the other things, there's a guy at our office who will get fever blisters, right? This is a herpes virus on his lip. And he would walk around. I remember him walking around the office with a little napkin, because when he would get them, they would, form on his lip, they would burst, and then he would just be, trying to keep them dry. He shared, he doesn't walk around with the napkin anymore. Apparently you can feel when those are going to happen, right? You can feel a tingling when they're going to happen. He says, I can feel the tingling, but they never happen, right? So we're not saying the virus is gone, but we're saying it doesn't manifest anymore since he's been on the product. That was very surprising.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Honestly, we have so many testimonials on so many aspects of human physiology. Again, you're left in this quandary, like, how could this be happening? And if you lean on that BOSS theory, that buffering oxidative stress system, then you're, again, reducing the negative impact of overstressed mitochondria. We are all overstressed in this modern society. Yeah, it's not that surprising that we're getting head-to-toe testimonials.
What's next for it? Like, what experimentation do you still want to do? What kind of formulations do you want to make? Like, is this just at the point where you want to scale it and get it out to everybody, or are there tweaks or new products you're coming out with?
So we do come up with new products. We actually have a face serum. It was kind of funny. About 6 months ago, I was on a Zoom call with about 5 people. It was my first time meeting them. So I'm just not going to remember them, right? They came up to our booth as a group and they're like, hey, Chris, we were on a Zoom meeting. And I was kind of joking. Oh yeah, I remember all of you and your names and the names of your pets, right? Like I just really didn't have it wasn't going to happen. But even though like they're aware of the science behind what's going on and they're actually getting it to their clients, 2 of the women in the group were like, okay, this is great. Whatever, 90% extension of life in Wistar rats. That's amazing. But we have a 2-part face serum, which is a peptide and our ESS60 molecule. And people are just raving about that. Maybe that's the thing I'm most surprised about, right? If the story, my business partner and I we were happy-go-lucky carbon nanomaterial scientists. We didn't really want to get into this, we'll call the supplement industry very challenged. And so we didn't want to be here. And our customers kind of insisted on it. We look at the industry and we're thinking this is going to go bad really quickly, right? Because supplements are a challenged market. We've got the lab. We know how to work with molecule. Let's make sure that we keep consumers safe and getting a high-quality product. So we really did get into the market. And then one of our business partners was like, hey, we need to make a face serum. And you can imagine how excited I was. I was like, yay, face serum. That's what I was dreaming of this morning when I woke up. So we make this space serum, and it's a high, the testimonials are off the charts. And then my director of research comes to me and says, hey, I found a molecule. It's a peptide. It's got 30 years of peer-reviewed published research on skin and hair improvement. Chris, you need to look at it. I look at it and I'm like, we got to come out with something that has this peptide in it. We call the peptide UTH29, Youth29, so UTH29. Peptides are water soluble. Our ESS60 molecule is oil soluble. You can shove those two things together with an emulsifier, but there is no, I don't even like how emulsifiers sound. If you Google them, there's nothing healthy about them. So we ended up keeping it as a 2-part Reduo face skin treatment system. And so you put 1 squirt of the UTH29 lotion and then 2 drops of the ESS60 activator, and you actually mix it in your hand. You activate it real time in your hand. And that's what these ladies were raving about. They were less concerned about, C-reactive protein and more concerned about, what an amazing product it was for their skin.
Well, it makes sense. It's different markets, different wants,
Yeah.
Something that you're interested in, other people know. So who has been on this the longest? Has anyone been taking it for years at a time? And, if so, what is that person experiencing?
Yeah, well, I would certainly be one that's been taking it for years at a time. I think maybe the longest is people back as early as probably 2013 are probably still taking this product. So there are people who have been on it for 10 years, 10 or 11 years. And I mean, when I am not in a position to take the product regularly, I notice my reduced focus and energy. I don't really notice that much impact on sleep. I'm a fairly good sleeper, as I kind of alluded to. I can drink a cup of coffee and go to sleep. But we have people so the lady in the next office to us, at one point she was talking about oncology and her oncology treatment. And I didn't realize that she was going through it. And I was like, hey, here are a couple of bottles. And I went back to her about 10 days after I had given her the bottles. And I was like, hey, have you noticed anything? And it's interesting because I'm not really vested in this, right? Obviously I'm making my living doing this now, but I'm not somebody who has spent his life toiling in a lab to make this very specific thing, right? I've been manufacturing the molecule. I was happy selling it to research institutions around the world. They thought it was toxic. They put it in the study. And now I have a health product on the market. So I'm not so deeply emotionally vested in it. So it's kind of funny. I asked her, have you noticed anything? And she said, disappointed, to give me disappointing news. She's like, Chris, I haven't really noticed anything. And I asked her, well, what about your sleep? And her eyes got baby deer big. And she was like, oh yeah, I've been waking up earlier. My sleep has been better. So sometimes it's hard for people to notice what's going on. I mentioned Gwen. She was at the 3-month mark. I wasn't really sure. Our shortest term in terms of showing some results, I've got a video of a lady saying, I took my first serving today. I didn't finish my cup of coffee. I just didn't need whatever the coffee was going to give me. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I just was sharing some more.
No, that's good. That's very good. Again, where are you headed now? Are you trying to find new and additional markets for it? Are you trying to get the word out, or, where is it at?
Yeah. So I didn't answer your question. So the scientific process is supposed to work this way. There's a hypothesis, right? And then you test the hypothesis. Interestingly, in this case, the hypothesis was that it was toxic, and then it's not toxic, right? They live 90% longer. The next thing that is supposed to happen is another organization, another lab recreates that initial study. Here we are. So that study was published in mid-2012. We're now, almost at the end of 2024. So we're talking about 12 plus years that nobody's stepped up to do that. We're doing some kind of core studies to prepare us to go because we use a very particular lab. They want these particular studies. We've got one more to do. And our goal is to recreate that original rat study. Now we're going to make some changes to that rat study, but that's what needs to be done. Now, it's an extremely expensive rat study, right? Because it's 62 months. We're talking 5+ years. And the way these types of studies work is they must be paid up front because they don't want some financial difficulty to cause you to euthanize a bunch of animals unnecessarily, right? So that there's no results, which I think is awesome. So we're currently budgeting and saving so that we can pay that lump sum and recreate that original study. We think we will extend beyond 90% because our dosing strategy is going to be very different, but that's really where we are. We're also looking, this guy approaches me literally just this last weekend and is like, hey, it's got a positive impact on C-reactive protein. Now that's something that is cost effective and we can do some smaller studies like, hey, you're a new customer, you've never tried the product before. Could we'll send you a C-reactive protein test kit, give us that test. And then 2 months in, if you could give us another test, then we'll have some really, really nice data to look at.
And people to do a longitudinal study. Yeah. It would be very, very difficult and even more expensive, but
I kind of joke, right? So sometimes I'll come on a podcast like yours and I'll say, hey, I can send you some product. And if you're willing, I could come back on and we could talk about what results you did or didn't have. And you could share what it's like to live twice as long in 1 month.
Well, maybe you should get a shirt that says I'm 300 years old,
And counting. Yeah. I mean, if the average human lives 90% longer, the average human would live to 152. And remember, like everyone's brain goes to, oh, the oldest human, 152. Okay. No, that's the average. There's a bell curve around 152. And so it's pretty exciting times. And because of this molecule, that's why I started a podcast where I'm digging into longevity. I'm going to this A4M. We had a booth at A4M, again, American Association of Anti-Aging Medicine, to look at like what is possible and what are we going to do in the future. And it's just incredibly exciting.
Last question for people that are on a strict way of eating, let's say ketogenic diet versus, like standard American diet. Are you hearing different anecdotes? From what I see, nothing can really fix you're not having a good diet, but maybe it helps people less, maybe more. I don't know.
Well, if you're looking, one of the problems, first off, if you're on the SAD diet, figure out how to get off of it. Like it's really important. A lot of people are kind of aware of yo-yo dieting, right? You get on a diet, you lose some weight, get off the diet, and you put weight back on. I believe that is because almost any diet you go on gets you off of the standard American diet. If you just don't eat the standard American diet, you will lose weight. You will be healthier. And so that would be a very big push for me. The standard American diet causes inflammation. There's all sorts of things that we're consuming, whether it's glyphosate, whether it's not just gluten, but a whole lot of the lectins that are in wheat. I've had 70 plus conversations, and a general conclusion is most people can fix most of their problems if they get off of wheat, get off of all grain, and potentially drop milk, right? Milk products, dairy products. And so I would encourage you to do that. Now, on a standard American diet, you're talking about inflammation. We have to be very careful about talking about inflammation, but that's actually kind of acute inflammation, right? I eat this and my body is inflamed from that. The fact that you eat it every day means you're doing acute damage, which ends up being long-term chronic inflammatory damage over a long period of time. There's even a word called inflammaging, right? That's how tied to aging we believe inflammation is. And I believe, when that doctor shared with me, it doesn't matter if you're a man, woman, pre-surgery, post-surgery, etc., like that should apply to the standard American diet. And you should notice how you feel on that. And also get off of that diet. It's just so bad.
Well, very good. Chris, for listeners, where can they go to try out the MyVitalC?
Yeah, so we made a special link for your audience, so they can go to myvitalc.com/finding genius. On that page, they'll find a $15 coupon. So the coupon code is on that page. So you got to go to myvitalc.com/finding genius. There's 2 pieces of advice. People are like, what would you recommend, right? Because we have olive oil, MCT oil, avocado oil. We always recommend the olive oil for 2 reasons. The first reason is we're a science-backed organization and all of the research is in olive oil. The second reason is the higher concentration of the ESS60 molecule is in the olive oil. And I also want to share, it's not going to be on that landing page. Again, myvitalc.com/finding genius. It's going to be in the menu structure. You can find my book. The book is Live Longer and Better. It's available on Amazon for $20. It's available on our website for $20. But I have a charity component that I'm really proud of. So if you buy the book on our website, you can pay $10 for me to sign it. So I'm happy to do that. And the full $10 goes to OR, Operation Underground Railroad. You may remember a movie, The Sound of Freedom, which was kind of covering child sex trafficking and this Operation Underground Railroad working to stop it. So that full signature fee, that full $10 goes to Operation Underground Railroad.
Oh, that's great. Well, Chris, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and talking about this molecule and your company. I appreciate it.
Richard, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.